So, hi everyone, and welcome to Women's Health Matters podcast. And on this podcast, we cover so many topics for women who are suffering with menopause, perimenopause, or even with fertility issues or their cycle. And I'm Lucy Townsley. I'm a women's health consultant. And today I'm joined by Sarah Pittendrigh. I met Sarah, actually, my sister very kindly gifted me a 4-week coaching program with Sarah to help me promote my business. And I got on brilliantly with Sarah, and I asked her if she'd come on my podcast because her story is truly amazing. I haven't heard it completely because we briefly touched on it when we were doing the coaching, but I found it so beneficial. So welcome, Sarah, to this podcast. I'm really honored to have you here. So can you introduce yourself and tell us about you?
Absolutely, Lucy, and thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. So, Sarah Pittendrigh, I am mum, multi-award winning entrepreneur, founder, author, podcast host, and coach. Coaching very much to pay forward the lessons that I've learned on my bumpy journey as a female entrepreneur, as a mum in business. It is a juggle. It can be a challenge, and I think to share the lessons, to be my hindsight, to be somebody else's foresight, is important, because can be a very, very lonely place being a female entrepreneur, and I've chosen to step up and fill that gap.
And how have you done that? Like, you told us when we first met, you told us the story that you went from having it all to actually having nearly to sell your house and reinvent yourself. So how did that happen? How did that journey start?
Well, I didn't even have the privilege of trying to sell my house. My house was repossessed, so I didn't even have a home. I was squatting. It was in 2008, and my previous co-directors and I had a big corporate event and leisure business, which we lost in the recession of 2008. And we'd 2 years prior to the recession, we'd invested heavily into the growth of that business. And unfortunately, when the business, the way the recession was and everything, we ended up with more money going out than coming in. And the borrowing had to have personal guarantees, to take the business to the size we wanted. And in fairness, it was going well until, this recession happened, and then other things that have happened along the way. And so the business closed, and as a result of that, I ended up bankrupt. I was a bankrupt single mum. I was divorced. My little boy was 9. And part of the bankruptcy meant that my home was to be repossessed, which it was. And I ended up literally on income support. So I had nothing. We went from having a business. I was a high performing entrepreneur in my own right. I wasn't married or anything. I was a single mum bringing up my son. We had our own home. We had everything we thought, that we needed. And literally the rug was pulled from under our feet, and we ended up with absolutely nothing. And he ended up on free school meals. It was really hard, and it just shows you how, decisions in business can, we thought we were doing the right thing. We'd gone into a contract with a big group. We'd invested heavily in this contract to deliver it. We didn't know a recession was coming, just like we didn't know COVID was coming, and it just shows you how fragile, and precarious the markets can be. And on the back of that, as I say, we lost our business.
So there's a couple of questions I'm going to ask you for this, because I can imagine this would be questions that people would want to know. Like, how do you, well, for starters, what was the reaction from your friends? Because sometimes, when you have friends and then because you don't have or be what they think you should be, they drop you. How did that happen?
Do you have friends or do you have associates? How many real friends do you have? That's the question. Yeah. I bet I could count on less than a hand how many real friends I've got. And that's where people misinterpret friendship. You got friends or associates, and you're absolutely right in what you said there. And it's amazing how many people jump ship. My family stood by me. I had my family. I had my son. and I had my ex-husband, who's now my husband again. We remarried, and you know, they were there. They were there, and that's the thing. It's who's really there for you when the chips are down, because that's who your real friends are. I'm not into this associate game playing. I have real friends, and then I have boundaries for associates.
It's very true, actually. It is true. The real friends. I'm lucky I've got some really good real friends as well.
Yeah.
And they're there for you when you
Yeah.
need them.
I've got a handful of really good friends, and I mean they're super, super duper good friends. Do you know what I mean? But that's on one hand. It's not like a Facebook social media where everybody's your friend. It's like, no, I'm talking about friends. You know, that's just a glorified social media channel where you've got a load of associates and nosy parkers, but your true friends are the people who you can count on one hand, that you know when the chips are down, you're there for them and they're there for you, and you can tell them your deepest and darkest secrets and you know they're not going anywhere. That's your real friends.
That's so true. And also, how did you in 2008 pick yourself up and start again? Because, you know, when you're wiped like that, that takes a lot of courage.
Yes, it was necessity. It was necessity. It was my son. I think if I wasn't a mum, if I hadn't had my son, I don't know where I'd have been, if you want the absolute honest truth. But the motivation was that I have a responsibility. I brought this little man into the world, and I had a responsibility to be a role model, to be the best version of myself as I can be for him, and to make sure that, you know, I don't let him down. And I think what happened was I did sort of I did break down. There's no doubt about it. You know, I'd absolutely burnt out. But the sort of pivotal point was my house was repossessed, and there was a guy came through the gate one day to tell me that he was there to take photographs of it for the auction, and it was going to auction. They didn't know when, but it was going. And I think that point there was like, you know, I'd done a lot of wound licking, and I had a lot of anxiety and panic attacks and felt really bad. And then when he came through and we had that conversation, it was like that realization that I'd have to be taking the furniture out of my son's bedroom. And it would be like, well, where the hell are we going? You know, my parents luckily lived opposite. But, you know, like you can go back to your parents, people can say, oh, you just go back, live with your mum and dad. But maybe it's not that straightforward. Do you know what I mean? Nobody knows what people's situations are like. Nobody really knows what's going on in other people's families and so forth. And maybe I didn't want to have to go back and live with my mum and dad. You know, they were very supportive and so forth. But it's a hell of a thing, you know, when you've been financially independent and you've been very proud of that all your life, to have to go back to mum and dad. So I think one of the things is being muted, that we might have had a caravan in their yard type of thing and moved into that temporarily. And I think it was all of those sort of conversations and that reality. You know, no, I didn't even have a bank account. You know, I had absolutely nothing other than a little booklet would come through from income support that you would tear out your little chitty and you'd go to the post office and get your cash, and that would last you till the next fortnight. And anyway, so when this guy came through, it was just like, I can't ever explain it. It's in my book, but it was a bit like this fire sort of raged from nowhere that I didn't even know existed within me. And it was as if to say, are you just going to stand there and let your home be taken away from you? You know, that home that you've built, that safe space for you and your son. Are you really going to just let that go? You've got to start fighting. You've got to stop that wound licking. You've got to get up off your backside and you've got to learn from those lessons, these valuable lessons that you've just had through failure. You need to take a step back and look at them, learn from them, and use them to drive you forward and design a life that you and your son deserve, and a life that's on your terms. And that was my change in mindset, And then from there on, that's when I started to process and work out exactly what it was that I needed to do. And I did that by looking at all of the things I didn't want in my life, all of the things that I didn't like in my life, all of the things that I didn't want to do, all of the things that I'd put up with that I didn't want to put up with anymore. And then from realizing what I didn't want and what I didn't like, I then found out the sort of things that I would like. And then I started to try and shape and get creative ideas of what it would be that would make me happy moving forward. What was that lifestyle that I craved? And I would do my utmost to go out there and make it happen.
That's really good. I'm intrigued about your husband. You divorced and then got back together. Was it a divorce because your soul was working, or was it more in depth than that? And how did he must have helped you through this stage as well?
Yeah. So we got divorced. Well, first of all, we grew up together as kids, competing ponies together when we were very, very small. So we'd been friends for many years. And then we ended up going out with each other. He'd, funny enough, been over in Ireland working with racehorses. And then we bumped into each other in the local pub, and I hadn't seen him for a while. And we started going out with each other, much to his parents' disgust. They were, he's an only child, farmer's son, having racehorses, pointers, show horses. And he was riding, he had his category B, he was riding under rules against professionals, but he was also competing some of the show horses as well. And they didn't want his attention taken from that because they got a huge amount of pleasure out of him fulfilling their dreams. So I was a real spanner in the works, if you like. Even though I had horses myself and was very, very supportive, they just didn't want me there. I wasn't good enough, and they told me as many times as they could possibly tell me that I wasn't good enough. And again, I explain it more in the book, and it's, it was very uncomfortable. But anyhow, we ended up getting married against probably their wishes, and I had got a lovely cottage nearby, to sort of in between his parents' house and our house. It was really lovely, and it just was a nightmare. It got to a point where it was them pulling him all the time to be there, and me sort of just wanting my husband to be at home and supporting me, if you like. And it just got so uncomfortable. And then, and I had to work. I had to be the breadwinner. So I've never been what I would call this, and I could be perceived to being a very ambitious female entrepreneur. The reality is, if I'd had a choice, I'd have been at home doing my horses and I'd have been a stay-at-home mum. That's the reality, because I would have loved to have done my horses and I'd have loved to have had the choice to look after my son. But I was never offered that, ever. I had to pay the bills. There was a mortgage to pay, there was bills to pay, and the money wasn't going to come in from anywhere else. So I just had to step up and get on with it. So then when we had William, who is now 23, I went back to work before the end of my maternity because we needed the money. And I was never given the opportunity to, would you like to stay at home and look after your son? Would you like to be a part-time mum? It was like, really, we need to get you back to work because we need the money. And that was where the rot really set in for me, because I wanted to be a mum. That's my drive. I get really upset when I talk about that.
Take your time. I know that pain, that I've been there.
Yeah, I get really, really emotional about that because I'd never got the pleasure of those early years. Anyway, I'd had enough, and we got divorced when William was 2. So then really what happened was I then, was working and doing, and then I got an opportunity to be on the board of this the event business, which was great, and it grew to a 7-figure business. And we thought everything was right going into this contract, and as I've explained, it just for what various reasons in the recession, unfortunately, it all went to pot, and we lost the business. So that was when I decided. I thought, right, okay, I've had enough, really. I want to start living life on my terms. I'm on the bottom. I couldn't be any lower. I was absolutely on the bottom. I was broken financially, mentally, physically, exhausted. A divorced single mum, bankrupt. What sort of a bloody example was I for my son? And that was where I thought, right, that's it. Enough's enough. I need to change the trajectory. of my life. And I used that adversity to become an opportunity.
It's amazing. Tell us about the book, your book that you've written.
So the book, I call it the bloody book. It's a joke. So I co-wrote this book with Eleanor Mills, who was the former editor of the Sunday Times and the editor of the Sunday Times magazine. And she's absolutely phenomenal woman. And we met on LinkedIn, and we've a shared interest on championing midlife women. Yeah, we were massive believers in that, we've got it all to play for. And I'd read one of her articles and we hooked up, had a conversation. I was good chatting like you and I are. And I suppose she heard my story and she was like, have you ever would you ever thought about putting this into a book? I'm like, oh God. Yeah, one day I'll do this book. But I said, I can't bear it. I can't bear the thought of sitting at a desk and having to bloody write and type and do. It's not me. She said, well, she would co-write it with me. So she would come up to Northumberland, she would interview me for 2 days, and she would go away, put this whole skeleton together of this book in my voice. And then I had to put the meat on the bones. So I had to, do the rest of it, which was a fair deal. And so she would sort of lay it out and do, and that's what we did. So it's a memoir, really. It's a memoir going right back to my childhood. Because what happened when lost the business and everything, got going again, and I'm sure further down the line we'll talk about how I got going and I created a multi-award winning business, blah de blah de blah. And ultimately I've become a successful multi-award winning entrepreneur. But when the recession hit, the pandemic hit, and it meant that I couldn't keep busy. I hadn't realized how much busy was a distraction from how I really felt. So the pandemic creating stillness terrified me. And all of these whirring thoughts started coming. My husband and I had just finished a huge property development project. We'd built 8 barn-style homes out of our traditional farmsteading, which was what happened. His parents both died. We're jumping around a bit here, but his parents both died, and ultimately he got left with the farm. The farm was underperforming. Farming's just hard, bloody work, and they were his business partners. It wasn't performing well. He was exhausted with the whole thing. His parents had both died of cancer within short succession of each other, and the whole place just felt as if it had died. Do you know what I mean? It was just really stagnated. And anyway, I'd identified this opportunity to convert the houses, and we built 8 beautiful between 3 and 5 bedroom stone executive homes, a real stunning high-end development. And we sold them all just before the pandemic, thank the Lord. So I'd always believed that money would make me happy. I thought that when I had no money and I felt so bad, and money was the route to my happiness, yeah. And as long as I had money, I'd be happy. So when I didn't have money, I felt horrendous and very scared and out of control. So I just imagined that if I worked and worked and worked and ended up putting a pot of money in the bank, then that would be it. Problem solved. I'd be as happy as Larry. The reality was I banked all that money, the money of my dreams, the aspirations of my dreams. And I still felt the same. I still felt like shit. I still had anxiety.
Was that a bit of a shock to you?
Yeah, it was terrible, because I thought, I'm not going to feel like that. And so when the pandemic came, just as we'd finished the project, and I was a bit in limbo land, because I franchised my other business, which we can talk about later, which means that my franchisee's fronting that and basically run that for me. So I don't really have to do anything with that. Just finished this huge big project. My son's 23 and, a man and doing his own things. And I was thinking a bit like, oh God, I've banked this money, but I feel redundant. What the hell? What the hell do I want out of life? I don't even know who I am anymore. When did I even last feel happy? Can I even remember what happy felt like? Oh my God. So what I did, I sat down and I thought, how would I solve this? If this was a bankrupt business, how would I build it back up again? What would I do to build a business? Because that's all I know how to do. I don't know how to build people up, but I know how to build businesses. So I turned the strategy that I used when I was bankrupt to build Simply Bows and chair covers. And the same strategy that I realized I'd used to develop the property and the farm diversification project. I didn't really know it was a strategy. I just knew it was my go-to. And I started writing it out exactly the same, asking myself the same questions as I would ask if I was building a business. But this time the business was me. So it was building me up and turning all those questions on me. So I did it, and I identified that the root of my problems had stemmed from my childhood, from right back when I was a tiny, tiny little girl. And I worked through the whole process, and it all started to make sense. I'd suffered from agoraphobia. I'd suffered from panic attacks and everything. And I realized it was all about not feeling safe. There were many, many times in my life when I hadn't felt safe. So I put all this together. And then while this pandemic was going on and I felt like I'd squared myself up, I was on LinkedIn and I could see how people were worried and they were pivoting and how they were feeling anxious and lots of worrying thoughts going on and a lot of loneliness. And I thought, you know what? I think I can find my true purpose here. And my true purpose is mentoring and coaching and helping people realize their full purpose, their true potential. And I think I understand why they aren't. And they're blaming burnout. They're saying this word burnout, but are they really burnt out? Or are they actually fed up? Are they tired of not getting a return on investment? Are they tired of putting time into friendships that they don't get a return on investment on? Are they tired of putting energy into relationships that they get no return on investment on? And are they tired of putting money and time and effort into a business and they think nobody actually really gives a shit? And they've got nobody to talk to. They've got nobody to share vulnerability with because they've built up years of authority. And if you were at the top of the table and you start sharing how you feel, then the people who are your clients or your team around you, or you're going to start wobbling that steady ship because they're going to think, shit, if that person at the top of the tree is worrying, we've got a lot to worry about because we're relying on her. So, and then at home, it's like, well, I can't go home and share how I feel because they all rely on me. I make all the decisions. They won't make a decision without me. So who the hell am I going to talk to? And they say, well, I'll go and talk to my friends. And they'd be like, whoa, don't come talk to us. We don't know anything about business. That's not our gig. You know, many friends aren't even working. You know, they're very happy to be at home and they're very happy to be supported by their partners, you know, so don't go into that territory because they don't get it. And then I thought, well, maybe I could step up and I could be that person. You know, I could be the person that they can go to, the sounding board. I could help them because I've got all this wealth of experience. I've had cancer twice. I've had no money. I've made money. I've had built businesses, lost businesses, become a successful entrepreneur, and I'm a mum. So there's a hell of a lot of experience all in there. And then, so then I rolled it out as a mentoring program, and I got I think I put 15 CEOs through in the first year, and it was phenomenal. The feedback, the testimonials, the breakthroughs, my God. And I just was like, you know, this is so needed. This is so needed. But I'm only one person and I can only get out to so many one-to-ones without wearing myself out because it's hard work, you know, helping and supporting and doing. So that's when I thought, when I met Elna, and I thought, well, let's do this book then. So the book is the memoir going right back to through everything that I've been through, how I ended up getting to create the I Can method. So the second part is actually the breakthrough strategy that I use in all of my mentoring, which was the breakthrough strategy that I used on myself. So that's basically what it is. So it's like sharing my own vulnerabilities right through from the first chapter, so we cover childhood, trauma, anxiety, bullying. We cover divorce. We cover being a single mum, bankrupt, building a business, cancer, menopause at 38 through going through a chemical menopause, We go through becoming that multi-award-winning entrepreneur, property developer, mentor. So, I mean, if somebody cannot be helped by one of those chapters, there's a lot going on. And so what it's meant by doing the book and doing it in that way. It's not preachy. It's not self-development of, oh, you need to be doing this. This is my story. It might resonate. And if it does, well, this is how I got through it. It might help you to do that too. And if you're feeling stuck and you want a little bit of inspiration, then maybe you'd like to have a go at this methodology in part 2. And that's how it is. And it means that by doing the book, I can get out to the masses to give them a helping step on the ladder. And then if once they've done all of that and they feel like they'd like more, time with me to help them, really get into the nuts and bolts of it all, then they can come to me for coaching. But at least it's helping. It's a start, isn't it, to help someone break through?
Oh my goodness, completely. I agree with you completely. Having gone through a separation myself and met these 2 amazing women who'd actually they were both Reiki masters, and they both had been through a divorce themselves. Yeah. And I looked at them and I was like, no, I know you're back with your husband, and I met someone else, which is amazing. But it's to know that you can survive, that you can actually do it. Because I think when you face that decision, it's like jumping off a cliff. That's the way I describe it, jumping off a cliff and really not knowing where you're going to land or how you're going to land, on your head, on your ass, on your, wherever it is. It's a very, very, very lonely, very lonely place to be, actually. And I think if you have support from, doesn't matter who it is who's been through it. So I think that's so important. And this everything, like your cancer journey, losing money, making money. Yeah. And I think it's important as well that the fact that you recognize that it was deeper and it wasn't just about money, because I think we get lost in that.
That's exactly it. And then it becomes very disappointing when you've chased money all your life, thinking money's your answer. And then you get to the end of your life and you've only got money and you're the richest corpse in the graveyard, but you haven't lived.
No,
I think that's terrible. That must be an awful way to end.
Very lonely.
Yeah, very lonely.
Incredibly lonely. So you've been on this epic journey and a real inspiration. As I said in the beginning, your coaching method was amazing, and it helped me so much over those 8 weeks we worked together, and gave me inspiration to continue on along my entrepreneurial journey. And I think it doesn't matter where you are, if you're in your own business or working within a corporation or just a job, locally or whatever it is. If you put your best in, you're going to get your best out and feel good in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. And doing what you love, and being true to your purpose. Yeah. I think that's really important.
It's amazing how many women, I'm sure you've met as well, who I meet through my work here, is that they lose themselves. As you said, you lose your joy. And I actually had a client the other day, and I was like, what do you like doing? And she goes, I don't know what I like doing. I said, what did you used to like doing? And she had to go back to her 20s. And this lady was in her 40s. It's so true. So this is a brilliant method. So if anyone wants to contact you about working with you or getting your book, how can they do that?
The easiest thing is to go on my website, www.sarahpittendrigh.com. Everything's on there. Absolutely everything. The podcast, the book, coaching, contact me, the whole thing. Or on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. Sarah Pittendrigh, and Instagram, Sarah Pittendrigh. There's 2 Instagrams. There's Sarah Pittendrigh, which is my personal one, but there's the other Sarah Pittendrigh, which you would see is my coaching. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. You've been a real inspiration. And obviously you can get your book on Amazon and on your website and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. And it was an absolute pleasure coaching you as well. I absolutely loved every minute of it. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you.